In this video, we'll review Unit 3 from Latin for Americans. In this unit, we learned a second conjugation. So conjugations are groups of verbs that follow similar patterns. We learned the first conjugation earlier with words like amo, porto, paro, and so forth. The second conjugation is very similar to the first conjugation, except you will see an E in place of places where you see instead of we expect an A. So first principal part will always end in EO, and the second principal part will end in ERE. The present tense of the second conjugation ends very similar to the first. Actually, it's exactly the same. First singular is O, second singular is S, third singular is T, followed by MUS, TIS, and NT, exactly like the first conjugation. The difference is the stem vowel goes from an A to an E. So dokio, dokes, doket. And it's translated the same. I teach, I am teaching, I do teach. The future is also exactly the same for the first and second conjugation. It follows the bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitus, bunt pattern. But again, instead of an A for the stem vowel, you'll have an E in between the future endings. The imperative, or the command, also is very similar. Instead of having an A, like ama, you have an E, doke, teach. Instead of amate, it's dokate with an E there. Now we'll learn a new tense. The perfect tense comes from the Latin word perficio, meaning to be complete. And so the perfect tense is for things that have been completed, things that have happened in the past and have been completed. The perfect tense is my favorite tense because it's formed the same way for all conjugations and even irregular verbs. All you do to form the perfect tense is you take the third principal part plus the endings I, isti, it, imus, istis, erunt. Notice here how the first and second conjugation are conjugated the same in the perfect tense. It's the I, isti, it, imus, istis, erunt. All you have to do to form the perfect tense is take the third principal part. For porto, it's portavi. For dokio, it's dokui. And again, we'll follow that same pattern, and it's translated the same. Notice how it's translated. I carried, I have carried, I did carry, showing a simple past of a completed action. The verb to be in Latin is the verb sum. Notice principal parts, sum, esse, fui, futurus. And so something to note about the verb to be is it's a linking verb. That means it does not take a direct object in the accusative case, but it takes a predicate nominative. So the verb to be, S right here, will have a nominative on both sides. The doctor is a good man. Nominative, nominative. Both doctor and man are in the nominative case. The verb to be is irregular, so it follows a different pattern. It's sum es est, sumus estis sunt. So the base may change, but notice how you have the M, S, ST, MUS, TIS, NT. Those endings are very similar to the first and second. So there are patterns in Latin, and so the more you recognize patterns and are able to follow them, the easier it will be to memorize. Now we're going to learn a variation of the second declension. That's the second declension with nouns ending in R. So this is a slight variation. The only difference here is instead of having the nominative singular end in us like servus, equus, or carvus, it will end in R like ager or noster. And so, but after that, it will decline exactly the same way. I, o, I, orum, is, os, is. Notice that the only thing that's different is the R in the nominative singular. After that, the pattern is the exact same that you'd follow for equus, carus, and so forth. Now we're going to learn a different variation of the second declension, the second declension neuter. And yes, Alfred Dang, there is a second declension neuter. The second declension neuter is very similar to the second declension masculine with a few variations that I'll show you on the next slide. An important thing when learning neuter nouns, pronouns, or adjectives is the neuter law. The neuter law is that for all neuter nouns, pronouns, and adjectives, the nominative and the accusative will be the same form. So if you know a neuter nominative, you also know the neuter accusative because it's the same form. Here's a neuter noun-adjective pair. Signum is a neuter noun, and parvum is a first, second declension adjective that will agree with it. Remember when we talked about us, a, the was used for neuter nouns. So I will highlight the differences here. Highlight here, first you see, is the nominative singular ends in um, not a us or not an r. And then it goes I, o, nothing new. Notice how I told you about neuter law, that the nominative and the accusative are the same. And now we'll look at the plural. Here we notice another difference. It's a for the plural, not I. So it's signa, then it's aurum, is, and then again I told you about neuter law. Since the nominative plural neuter is a, the accusative plural neuter will also be a, and then is a. So those are your differences. For the nominative singular and a for the nominative and accusative plural. Other than that, this declines just like all other second declension nouns. Something important to remember is that genitive always shows declension. And so when you're given a vocab word or a noun in your vocab list, it will give you the nominative singular and the genitive singular. The genitive singular will tell you the declension. The genitive singular is unique for every declension, and every noun in that declension will have the same genitive. So for the first declension, your nominative is a and your genitive is ae. So anytime you see a noun that is ae given as the second part, that will always be first declension. Not necessarily with that first part a, it can vary a little bit. For the second declension, you have nominatives that could be us, er, r, or um, but all the genitives have an I after them. Whether you're talking about servus, puer, where, or signum, they will all have an I after them. Now we'll review agreement of nouns and adjectives. Remember, adjectives in Latin agree with a noun that it modifies in case, number, and gender, not declension. They can have different endings. When we talked about an adjective like magnus a the us is used for the masculine and follow the second declension masculine pattern. The a is used for the feminine and will follow the first declension feminine pattern. And the is used for the neuter, which will follow the second declension neuter pattern. Most of the time they'll be the same, but as we go on and we learn more nouns, it will vary. We highlighted these differences early on, that nata and agricola, although they are part of the first declension, they'll follow the second declension endings for their adjectives, because both nata and agricola are masculine. There are some adjectives that end in er, but you should not be afraid of these, because if you can handle the second declension nouns that end in r, the adjectives that end in er will behave exactly the same way. The one major difference is that sometimes the e stays, like in something like liber, libera, liberum, or it drops, like sacer, sacra, sacrum. And that's not a major deal. You can figure that out as you go along. But just notice that sometimes the e stays and sometimes the e disappears. And that's also true for some second declension nouns that end in er. Now we're going to learn about a use of the ablative. So the ablative of place from which. So this sounds really fancy, but it's really not. It uses certain prepositions like ob, ex, and de, and all it's telling you where something has come from. So for example, in this example here with the soldier, via, this is telling you that the soldier is going away from the street. So it's in the ablative, and the place from which he's coming from is the street. This one right here is de, which can mean down from, and so it's telling you is that the man is coming down from the forest. The place from which he came from is the forest, and again it's in the ablative. And ex is out of, and it's the ablative, and it's just showing you the fish is coming out of the water, the place from which it came. So it does sound fancy, but it's really not, and it's pretty simple to use. Next, we're going to learn about the accusative of place to which. So this is used with the preposition in or ad, which shows the place to which you're going, and usually towards the motion that you're going to. And so example with here is the boy is going towards the water. So it's using the accusative case and showing the place to which he's going to. And in here, the boy goes into the water. And so goes into the water. That's in plus the accusative. Now notice here, this is ablative use. The boy is in the water. So notice the difference. When the boy is going into the water, you use in plus the accusative. When the boy is just in the water, just sitting there, you will use just the simple in plus the ablative. Now you learn the vocative case, and this is the last case that we'll learn this year. So the vocative case is used when you talk to people directly. So if you're addressing something, you'll use the vocative case. So the vocative case is really easy because most of the time it's exactly the same as the nominative. There are only two exceptions. For nouns that end in US or IUS. If the verb ends in US, you'll replace it with an E. If the verb ends in IUS, you replace it with an I. So if I'm talking to Marcus, which is US, he becomes Marque in the vocative. If I'm talking to my son, which is IUS, Filius, it just becomes Fili. Except for those two exceptions, US becoming E and IUS becoming I, the vocative case is exactly the same as the nominative. Now we're going to quickly review vocab. So now we learned the neuters. And so nouns that end in UM will be I neuter, because they're second declension neuter. And nouns that end in ER will be I masculine as well, I masculine, and those are second declension masculine, which end in ER. There's one tricky noun here, and that's castra. The A makes you think that's AE feminine, but castra is actually a neuter plural. Its genitive is aurum, and it's neuter. It's the noun for camp, which means it's always plural. Even though it's singular in English, in Latin it's always plural. And they have a little note here that certain things like barbarus, captivus, and colonus are shown as I masculine, but if you give them an A, they can also be AE feminine if you're referring to a female captive or a female ally. Here's a quick list of adjectives we learned. Remember, again, now we know what the us, a, means. So again, us is for masculine, a is for feminine nouns, and then is for neuter. A couple of things we want to note here. We have ones that end in r, but that shouldn't throw us. We'll still be a, the r will just follow the pattern of the second declension for nouns ending in r. And then this one's a little weird. It's singularly, which means one at a time. It will be a because it's only a plural adjective. Now here's a list of our verbs. Things are getting a little tricky now because we learned the second conjugation, which ends in eo. And these don't have a regular pattern for principal parts. So it makes it a little harder for you to remember what their principal parts are. But anything that ends in eo will be part of the second conjugation. And right now, although this will change, the verbs that end in o have the principal parts are, awi, atus, and are part of the second conjugation. And then we learned about sum, the irregular, which has the principal parts sum, esse, fui, and futurus. And lastly, our adverb ibi, meaning there, and then our prepositions. And so, remember, these prepositions take the ablative as the object of the preposition. And in can take both the ablative and the accusative. If in means like in or on, it will take the ablative. If it means in like into or onto, then it will take the accusative.